No one's allowed to look at my brother when he eats. I never thought it was weird. It was the same as Dad going to work every day and Mom cooking dinner every night. Just, Maddie always ate upstairs. Mom made sure everyone at the table had a full serving before she got to work on Maddie's plate. She would load it with supersized portions of whatever was for dinner, plus leftovers from last night. By the time it was ready, the mountain of food would put Dad's appetite to shame. The night after my 8th birthday, Mom's arms shook carrying Maddie's dinner. She teetered across the kitchen with a serving plate, the one we use for appetizers when we have guests. 3 hamburgers, 2 chicken breasts, egg salad, at least a half dozen corn dogs, and a pile of potatoes. Squeezed next to that were pork chops, meatballs, shrimp fried rice in a Tupperware, and a full mixing bowl of mac and cheese. "Do you need help, honey?" Mom shook her head, finding her balance on the stairs. "Oh no, Mama's got it. Matty's not feeling well today. Don't stuff him now." I turned to Dad. Frankly, I was in a bad mood. Matty hadn't wished me a happy birthday yet. In fact, he hadn't come out of his room all day yesterday. He was 2 years older than me, and our sibling rivalry ran deep. Why does Matty need that much food? What if I'm still hungry? Why doesn't he just come down and eat it here? He's a growing boy, you know. Puberty's hitting him. That's a time when every kid undergoes remarkable changes. You'll see. He ignored my other question, so I asked again. Dad put his fork down. "Your brother is self-conscious. I know, we've told him it's silly, but we're respecting his decision, giving him time. And you should too. He's your big brother, but he doesn't have one. What he's going through can be scary." I crossed my arms. "Sounds like a big baby. Enough." His voice cut through me. He spoke through his teeth. "Apologize," I mumbled under my breath. "Excuse me?" "I'm sorry," Dad nodded. Mom came down a minute later, and we finished our dinner in silence. In bed, I began to plot a nasty trick. The next day after the bus dropped me off, Mom told me she was going for groceries and to stay in the house in case Matty needed anything. I went up to his room and knocked on the door. "Matty," there was no response. "Some of my friends from school are coming over today. Do you want to play with us?" Again, nothing. I made a face and started down the steps. He wasn't making this easy. Halfway down the stairs, there was a sound from behind his door. "Matty," something dragged a short distance before stopping. I held my breath, straining to hear more. A few seconds passed before I hopped the rest of the way down, confused but eager for my friends to arrive. Mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Hunter and Cody got dropped off. They popped out of an SUV Hunter's mom drove and waved, running towards the house. We played for a little in the yard while I explained my plan. Cody looked like he couldn't wait. "That doesn't sound nice," Hunter mumbled. "Matty's never nice to me. Remember my birthday party? He didn't even go on the bouncy house." Cody piped up, "Yay." "We're not gonna hurt him, Hunter." A few more minutes was all it took to convince him. Then dinner was ready. Mom tiptoed around the table, dispensing slices of brisket and spoonfuls of pasta with gravy and Italian bread. Cody and Hunter dug in immediately, in a few seconds vaporizing half their plate. I made sure to eat fast too, but kept an eye on Mom. She always put a lot of care into Maddie's plate. After she was finished, up she went. When she returned to the kitchen, there was nothing on our plates. "Wow, you boys are hungry." "Not anymore," I said, patting my stomach. "Careful," Dad laughed. "If you eat like that, you'll get sick." "Hey, Emph." I crossed my arms and scooted off my chair. "Come on, guys. Let's play in my room." "All right. Just don't bother Matty while he's eating. We hid our smiles. We made sure our footsteps could be heard from downstairs, walking into my room and loudly closed the door. Then, tiptoeing, we crept out of my room down the hallway until we were in front of Matty's door. "I'm still hungry," Cody giggled through his hands. "Shh," I knocked quietly. "Hello, Matty?" Silence. "Can I come in?" Hunter began, pointing insistently back towards my room. I waved him off. "Matty, it's just me." My friends left. 10 seconds trudged by. Cody looked disappointed. Something hot began to well up in my chest. It wasn't anger. Maybe jealousy? I put my hand on the doorknob. I got A's in all my classes, and Mom and Dad would pat me on the head before mentioning how Matty used to get a +S. Every day at school, the teachers always asked, "How's Matty doing?" I was the one who loved our dog, Archie. The one we had to give away because he never stopped barking at Matty's door. He doesn't play sports. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't even go to school. He never comes out of his room. He was a good-for-nothing older brother. No, it was hate. I hated Matty. I pushed the door open. Immediately, a vile smell hit our nose, causing Hunter to gag. The curtains were drawn tight around the windows, casting a gloom over the mess inside. Broken toys, shredded notebooks, overturned chairs, and even some broken glass. A cooking program for children played on a small TV, its volume just loud enough to hear over a rickety desk fan. Who's ready to welcome our guests for this episode? The fan could only do so much, though. Remains of food stained everything in the room. You couldn't step anywhere to avoid the mold covering the floor. Bits of meat clung to the screen of the television. Red sauce smeared the wall, and there was a large stain on the sheets of the bed. Hunter tapped my shoulder. "This is gross. I want to go back. Your brother is nasty," Cody proclaimed. He stepped meticulously into the room, leaving Hunter and I by the door, using the toys like you had stones to cross a river. He jumped onto the bed and recoiled. It's wet. We should leave," Hunter begged. "And what's your name, sweetie?" "The TV," whispered. I searched the room with my eyes. It was my first time inside in years. I remember when me and Matty used to be inseparable. I may have hated him, but it had been so long since I'd seen him. "I'm Emily." Cody bounced on a dry part of the bed, laughing. "So, where's the good food? Hold on," I said. "Matty, why Emily? You look good enough to eat." It was just unfortunate when Matty's accident happened. When I thought about it, I don't think I've actually seen him since that field trip. Mom and Dad would show me recent pictures and videos of him, but I can't tell if he looks older or not. It was partly my fault. I was distracted with all the gifts Mom and Dad get me afterward. They treated me with some of the money they got from the stem cell lab in court. Matty's accident was all their fault, Mom and Dad said. Something shifted from the far side of the room. Cody's face lost its color. "Cody, let's go." When his feet hit the ground, a pale hand darted from beneath the bed. Cody tumbled to the floor, shrieking. "Help!" Cody squealed. There was a clattering from the kitchen and footsteps hurrying up the stairs. Hunter ran out of the room wailing. I was glued in place by a morbid fixation. The hand that was clamped tightly around Cody's ankle. Was that Matty's? That thing, impossibly tall, clambering out from underneath the bed. That couldn't be my 10-year-old brother, right? I felt my dad's arm scoop me up and rush me into the hall. Before he shut the door, I could see Mom with her arms raised in front of a monster. It was holding Cody upside down. Its swollen belly dragged along the floor as if it had swallowed a boulder. I blacked out. The reason I'm writing this is because I didn't remember Matty until a few days ago. I'm in my 30 seconds. For the past month, my wife has encouraged me to go to a specialist due to night terrors that began last year. They had started infrequent, but recently it's been every other night that my cries disturb our sleep. I met with a woman who put me under some sort of hypnosis to help remember trauma. I woke up with those terrible memories. She told me the event could have been rejected from my memory naturally due to the severity of it. Or another specialist had induced amnesia on me. I had even forgot about Hunter and Cody. I looked for them both on social media and was able to get in contact with Hunter. He wasn't very receptive at first, but he agreed to meet after hearing my situation. We sat at a bar. He gulped down his liquor before speaking. My memory is a bit funky too. I was in a mental hospital for a couple months. We moved, and I learned how to push it away. The memory. In college, I found out it was labeled kidnapping. What do you mean? Cody never made it out of the house. That I remember. Your parents did a damn good job. I don't know what hoops they jumped through or whose pockets they filled. He paid for his tab. Don't contact me again. On the way back to my car, I tried calling my mom. She hasn't answered her phone all day. My dad passed away last year, but my mom still lives at my childhood home. I need to talk with her. In person. And maybe I'll burn that house down on my way out. Story 2. My husband keeps leaving eggshells under our wardrobe. At first, I was going to post this in a relationship advice subreddit, but as it started getting stranger, I realized it makes more sense here. So every morning, my F-35 husband M36 would wake up early and cook breakfast for us and our 2 kids. It was usually eggs and bacon, with some toast or biscuits or pancakes. We recently moved into a new 3-bedroom apartment in a much older part of the city, with this beautiful dark wood furniture already in it, since it was real wood. The lady renting it out decided it would be too heavy to be worth selling. Well, ever since, my husband seemed to have picked up a strange habit. He's always been a bit lazy with cleaning up after cooking, so I'd always have to take the used eggshells out of the carton and throw them away for him. After we moved into the new place, I was proud of him. There'd never be eggshells in the carton, so I assumed he'd taken the chance amid all the chaos to fix a few of his bad habits. Well, Q1 random Tuesday morning. It was a work holiday at my office, but everyone else was out of the house. I decided to sweep and dust the place thoroughly, which we hadn't done since we'd moved in a month or so prior. I found a lot of dust bunnies and some coins and knickknacks, but by far the strangest thing I found was when I got to the wardrobe in our bedroom. It stood about 4 inches 10 centimeters, I think, off the ground, on hand-carved clawed feet. When I peered under it, there was a lot of dust and spiderwebs, but behind it were eggshells. Admittedly, I jumped a little when I first saw them, but I pretty quickly realized, assumed they were just regular eggshells. Maybe 7 or 8. I swept them out from under the wardrobe and threw them away. I figured they were from the previous owner, though I was thoroughly confused by why they'd be there of all places. I cleaned again the next weekend. This time, I found eggshells under the couch. Pale white, slightly bigger, and slightly slimy. They must have been recent. That, and the fact I'd cleaned under the couch last time, ruled out the previous tenants as a source of the shells. I still wasn't sure if I wanted to bring it up with my husband. It seemed too strange of a thing to do intentionally, so I racked my brain for other explanations. Maybe they got knocked under there unintentionally, but how would that happen half a dozen times? Maybe they got dragged under there by an animal? But we didn't have pets, and thankfully no issues with rodents or other critters. Maybe one of our kids fished them out of the trash and put them there? But Zoe was too young to get into the trash can. She could barely walk yet. And Nick, well, Nick could have done it. He was 7, but I still couldn't think of a motive. Over the following weeks, this happened several more times. Once it was in a dusty corner of the pantry, but both other times it was the wardrobe again. I started getting increasingly curious, almost disturbed, by the occurrences. It was a part of my morning routine, before anyone else got up, to check under every piece of furniture and in the corner of every closet and pantry with a little penlight, to check for shells from the previous morning without being interrupted. It had gotten more frequent. Pretty much every day, I was finding eggshells, almost always under the wardrobe, nestled near the baseboard of the wall, not too far from the radiator. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to just watch my husband as he threw away the eggshells from breakfast, since now that we'd moved across the city. My commute was twice as long, and I had to leave before breakfast was ready. He'd still have some toast or oatmeal ready for me, though, while I did my hair and makeup. Finally, I decided to just confront him about it, since it was increasingly bothering me. Was this some sort of prank? A strange compulsion? Just his way of getting back at me for always complaining about the eggshells? Surely he knew that I knew, since I'd been cleaning them up every morning from under the wardrobe. When he got home from his job inspecting shipping crates one day, I gave him some time to relax, then strode into the bedroom with him and shut the door. "We need to talk about the eggshells." He gave a little smile and looked up at me. "So you noticed?" Of course, I noticed. I described to him my annoyance, and how after the first few times, I didn't really find it funny that he left raw eggshells all over the house. In fact, I didn't find it funny the first few times either. I told him to knock it off and stop with the wardrobe thing. "Under the wardrobe?" came his confused reply. I finally took the time to start throwing away my eggshells, since I knew it had always bothered you when I left them in the tray. "That's what I was talking about." "What on earth are you talking about?" I was speechless. "So you haven't been leaving eggshells all over the house?" "Almost every morning, I've been finding them. Under the wardrobe mostly, but I've found them in closets, in the pantry, in my bookshelf, in laundry piles, hell, even under the blankets of our bed. If this is some sort of prank, you've definitely gotten me good." His look of confusion was amplified. "Who do you think? Could Nick be doing it? Or is this some sort of prank on me? It can't be Nick. He's too squeamish around raw eggs." I tried testing the waters to see if it was him. He wouldn't even bring me an uncracked egg when I was baking cupcakes. Nick had always been a germaphobe, so his unwillingness to touch raw eggs didn't strike me as an act. "Are there any shells under there from this morning?" I had never considered checking under the wardrobe in the evening, so I did. I dropped to my knees and peered under it, and nothing. "What about the other places?" Intrigued, I grabbed my penlight. I'd been finding something every morning for the last week, so if there were any shells, I was sure I'd find them. I checked all the usual places, nothing. I checked the kids' beds, the kitchen cabinets, under the fridge, still not a sign of eggshells. "They must be being moved there overnight," I said, puzzled. I had never connected this to the eggshells, but I started noticing this odd skittering noise in the middle of the night. I would awaken, usually between midnight and a.m., to a strange clicking, like claws on the hardwood floor. It would go away after a second, so I assumed it was the house settling, or maybe a ceiling fan downstairs rattling the floorboards. Rodents had been an early thought of mine, but a call to the previous tenants and a knock at my neighbors' doors confirmed nobody had ever had issues with mice, and we'd never noticed food going missing, holes being gnawed, or droppings. I couldn't understand why mice would move eggshells around, but it was the most likely explanation I had, so I put out some humane cage traps with lures. One night, I woke up and heard the skittering again. This time, I grabbed my penlight and walked out into the kitchen. I shone it around, but the skittering faded off and stopped. On the way back to bed, on a whim, I peered under the wardrobe. At first, I thought I saw the shells again, but then I realized I was mistaken. They were uncracked, whole eggs. My curiosity turned to shock, then to revulsion as I realized they weren't ordinary eggs. They were larger, more rounded, slightly moist, and slightly translucent. I could even see darkish blobs floating inside the eggs. It took all of my self-control to not scream in horror, but I jumped and slammed my head into a shelf in the open, per-usual wardrobe. It woke up my husband, who came to his senses instantly, jumped out of bed, and asked if I was okay. I held onto the part of my head that I'd hit, wincing in pain, but managed to gesture under the wardrobe with the penlight. After looking at my head to make sure it wasn't bleeding, he cautiously peered under the wardrobe with the flashlight. "Oh my God," I heard him say. We whispered for a few minutes, unsure what to do. We couldn't think of any animal that laid eggs like that. We knew we needed to get rid of them, but didn't know where to put them or how to pick them up. We certainly weren't going to touch them. I shuddered to think of all the times I'd touched those shells with my bare hands. Once they'd mostly dried. My skin crawled as I realized whatever was hatching from those had done, so possibly hundreds of times under that wardrobe. We settled on using a dinner plate and a spatula to gather up the eggs and walk them downstairs and dump them in the dewy grass. My husband had suggested throwing them off the balcony, but I didn't like the idea of killing whatever was growing in those eggs, despite not knowing what it was. What if they were something cute? They were not something cute. The next night was by far the most horrifying night of my life. I'm going to warn you up front. You might want to just stop here if you've experienced something similar long ago in your life, because you'd rather not know what it actually was. But here goes nothing. I'd felt a bit on edge ever since last night. I'd struggled to sleep at all, so I grabbed an iced coffee from the fridge and pulled an all-nighter writing in my journal about what had been happening and how my life was going. As the sun rose, I started feeling a little silly and figured the eggs were something innocuous, though I still didn't have the slightest clue what. I went to work, albeit with a bad headache, and everything seemed fine. I didn't bring up the eggs with my coworkers, since they would probably think I was crazy or be grossed out and suggest something drastic. Like fire. Maybe I should have considered that route. That night, I checked the house for eggs, then went to sleep and was awoken by the usual skittering. This time, though, it was followed up by a muffled metallic clang and much more violent skittering. My heart skipped a beat. The trap must have caught some sort of animal in the house. I considered rousing my husband, but I figured I'd be brave. I took the penlight and peered cautiously around the door. The island counter blocked my view of the trap. As I carefully circumnavigated the counter, I caught a glimpse of the trap and screamed. It held a spider-like, gray, hairy creature, about the size of a rat, or a small dinner plate if you counted its legs. I dropped the light in shock, and it broke, engulfing the room in darkness. I heard more skittering behind me, and a hiss from the monster in the trap. My eyes were still adjusting to the darkness, but I could see movement out of the corner of my eye. I squared off with one of the creatures, which had its legs bent, as if it was about to leap straight at me. Looking around frantically, I realized my only remaining option. Up. I grabbed the cord to the attic door and pulled. Something soft and light fell on my head and rolled off my back, but I grabbed the ladder and yanked it down, never taking my eyes off the spider thing, its eyes glowing in the faint moonlight. I scrambled up the ladder to the attic, and the last thing I remember is seeing hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny pinpricks of light, blinking. Story 3. I inherited the movie theater my grandpa owned, but I wish he told me about the awful thing that happened in Screen 6. Supposedly, it had always been this way, stretching way back to when my grandpa opened this place almost 97 years ago. I inherited it when he passed a decade or so ago, given that my father didn't want anything to do with the place. And since then, I've made sure to diligently follow his final wish. He might have left me the theater, but there was one condition. Not that it'd be enforceable if I went against his wish. More about that later, but the condition was present nonetheless. Never, ever let the film stop running in Screen 6. Now, I'd practically grown up in that theater, given it was a nice little hangout spot after closing time, but I never knew anything about the existence of a sixth screen. It had always been 5. Grandpa left that sentence and a little picture guide to find the controls for that screen, as well as the security footage system for it. He also left a letter, only to be opened once I had been running the theater for long enough to understand the importance of Screen 6. It baffled me at the time, but I kept that wish too and tucked the letter away. He never told me where to find the screen itself either. The first thing I did was check the cameras, only to find they showed nothing of interest. No moviegoers were present in this secret little screen, nor were any employees. The black and white footage from the vantage point of a camera positioned above the screen of a silent, empty room filled with rows and endless rows of dusty chairs stared back at me. Somehow it was larger than all of our other screens. After unlocking the neat little contraption he described, I realized the system for that screen was digital. Huh, strange, I mumbled, given the fact our theater was always quite proud of being the only film-only establishment in town. I suppose digital files make running the screen endlessly an easier task. Something jumped out at me, though. The digital file being used to loop over and over was just that, a singular file. It wasn't cycling through a library of movies. The same one was playing over and over. The file name? Sacrifice. MX. I've always been a curious person, and part of me wanted to resist. Some instinct was screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. I had to take a glimpse at the little outdated screen synced up to the projector. It was grainy and degraded, footage that looked like it had been shot in the mid-20th century or so. A group of men dressed in black and women dressed in white circled a tree with interlocked hands. They looked like they were speaking, maybe singing. Regardless, there was no audio. They went round and round this great old tree for what felt like forever, before stopping in their tracks and just standing there for a minute or two. The footage cut an unspecified amount of time forward to reveal their black and white garments blowing in the wind as they hung from various branches of the tree. All of them. It didn't matter that there wasn't any audio. I could feel the silence seeping out of that screen. Cut to black. Part of me was horrified, and another part retained some morbid sense of fascination with what I'd seen. I wasn't planning on going against Grandpa's wishes anyway, but at least I'd seen something that spooked me enough to justify the strangeness of it all. Was that the entire film that had been playing over and over for God knows how long? How was such a massive auditorium just hidden away somewhere? What the fuck was that video? I needed to find out. God, I wish I hadn't. But I did. The next few weeks were spent meticulously researching everything I could possibly find about our little family-owned theater. My little theater. I spent hours on end in that projector room trying to make sense of what was being played. The footage described above wasn't alone, but remained similar to the others I've since seen. All feature large groups of people in what looks like pre-war Europe. 1930 or so is my best guess. They start off peaceful enough, almost joyous, but I've learned by now to reject the false happiness depicted. It grabs a hold of you before the violent sacrifices that soon follow rip your heart out. Sometimes I wonder about the people shown. There are so many of them across the different short films, probably more than I've known in my entire lifetime. All of them met such a gruesome end. It might sound easy to throw away their collective existence as mere pixels on a screen, but I can't. The local newspaper allowed me access to their archive to find out a little more, and things began to tie themselves together. I had to sift through cardboard box after cardboard box to find what I'd been looking for, but I eventually did. Back in 1931, there had been an awful incident at our theater. At the time it was owned by Grandpa, and things were looking up given it was the only establishment of its kind in town. Unfortunately, something terrible was to happen soon. It was a cool October evening when local police were alerted to a disturbance down at the movie theater by terrified patrons. You see, back then there was a Screen 6. Nestled right next to Screen 5, it was the focal selling point as a state-of-the-art screen showing only the finest films. Those in Screen 5 began to realize something was badly wrong when the sound of an incessantly crying and screaming child began to drown out the more pleasant sound of their film. The talkies, as films with spoken audio were known in their 1930s heyday, were a phenomenon, and it took a lot to distract those in Screen 5 from their entertainment. The child screamed for as long as it could, until annoyance turned to worry and eventually fear. By the time police swung open the double doors to Screen 6, the leather-white seats were soaked in crimson-red blood, and the patrons inside had long since taken their last breaths. Except one. Still, the child screamed. I've always been open-minded when it comes to the unseen. Not a believer per se, but not dismissive of the idea. Things began to come into a clearer focus. Hundreds of people had sacrificed themselves in that screen all those years ago, and now the screen is forever condemned to forever playing films of similar occurrences. The two had to be connected. The letter. It was time to open the letter. I was convinced I satisfied Grandpa's requirement for doing so, and it would fill in the parts of this deranged story I was missing. I slipped the letter out of its glum, off-white envelope, and began to read. To my beloved grandson, by now you probably know much more about the story of our little theater than you did when I left it to you. I'm sorry it took until we were separated for you to learn the truth, but it was something that had to be done. Those people that are in the films playing on Screen 6 were part of an ancient cult. The men of Mephistopheles they called themselves. They would live in communes, and the peaceful images you've come to see are of their day-to-day lives, and as you have also come to see, they would eventually offer themselves en masse in blood sacrifices. One of these sacrifices happened to take place in Screen 6 of our theater, and once again, I'm sure you have come to learn of this given you are reading this letter. The locations in which these sacrifices take place are forever bound to the souls lost there in some form or another. To illustrate, that great big tree in one of the films is now the site of countless suicides. Their crime? Daring to walk where the men of Mephistopheles once walked, and where they left this earth. Our particular curse happens to be that Screen 6 began to be the site of similar suicides, and so did our other screens. We could never figure out why they weren't contained to the immediate site of the original sacrifice, but needed to find a way to stop them. Times were tough, and the money the theater brought in was important to all of our lives. An occultist suggested the endless film screening as a way to stem the flow, whilst we found a more permanent solution. But before long, we realized it stopped the awful goings-on entirely. So we let the films play and then play some more. Screen 6 had originally been downstairs since the building only allowed for that kind of space down there, so we turned it into a tomb. Maybe the misguided souls lost there found some peace in the dusty catacomb of a theater left behind. Now, if you know the story of the sacrifice at our theater, you know there was a singular child who survived it all. That child, your father. I'm so sorry for keeping the truth locked away from you the way I did. You deserve to know whilst I was still there with you. Please know I only ever had your best interests at heart. I love you always. Poppy, it's been a few weeks since I found out the truth about our small-town theater. Sleeping has been difficult because of the endless nightmares, as is bothering to keep up maintenance of the place. Still, though, the film on screen 6 plays. Story 4. I wish I never went to the bathroom. It has been over a week since I last left the apartment. I was meant to return to work the other day, but have been avoiding my boss calls. She's out there now, watching me. I can see her through the window. She'll leave soon, but then she'll be back tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then the day after that. Same time, same place, always watching. It started in the bathroom of a McDonald's just down the road from where I work. It had been a long shift, and I had to stay behind 2 hours as a coworker called in sick. My legs were tired from standing all day, and my eyes were drooping from exhaustion. I washed my hands at the sink. The mirror reflected my awful features. Bags under the eyes. Acne scarring on my face. I felt icky. What are you doing here? A woman called from behind me. I flicked my hands in the sink to quickly dry them as I turned to face her. Excuse me, she continued. What are you doing in here? In front of me was a 40-something-year-old woman. Blonde hair and wearing sunglasses indoors. She looked furious. Just washing my hands, I said. You're a man, she said. I'm not. What are you doing in the female bathroom, you freak? She raised her voice over mine. I'm just using the toilet. The woman pulled out her phone and presumably started recording me. This pervert is in the ladies' bathroom checking on women. I lifted my hand up to block my face from the camera and walked brusquely out into the restaurant. I could hear the woman's heavy footfalls trail behind me. Look at this groomer walking off now. He's been called out, she said. I walked up to the front counter. No doubt she was there too. A member of staff was standing there putting an order together. Hey, I leaned over. Can you stop her? Oh yeah. Call the cops. We'll see what they have to say when they arrive. She said behind me. Sorry, ma'am, the staff member said. What's going on here? I don't know, I said. I'm just trying to use the bathroom, and she's harassing me. Go on. Call them. They'll kick this freak out. Ma'am, the worker said to her, I'm going to have to ask you to stop or leave. Stop what? She said, I'm just calling out this pedophile so they'll stop creeping on little girls. The worker sighed. I'll just call the cops. Yeah, they'll get this sicko out of here. She said. I sighed. You know what? I'll just go. Are you sure, ma'am? The worker said. Ma'am, the woman said. That's a dude. Yeah, I just needed the toilet anyway, I said. I don't want to make a fuss. Run away. She said, run away like the freak you are. Apart from the shouting woman, the place was completely silent as every bystander watched the situation unfold. I pulled my hoodie over my head and walked out the building as fast as I could. She followed. I walked across the McDonald's parking lot over to the supermarket next to me where I parked my car. The entire time, the heckler followed me, her phone still up and recording. I tried to ignore her as she kept screaming absurd shit over and over. It didn't take long to make it back to the car. I jumped in and locked the door. The woman pulled the handle as soon as it clicked. Luckily, she was too slow. My hands choked the wheel as the adrenaline started to fade. I didn't realize how fast my heart was beating until it began to slow. She stood outside the window, still filming and shouting her obscenities as I got control of my breathing. After a minute, I started the car and reversed out of the space. She followed, still recording from the window. Once on the road, I put it into drive and sped out of the parking lot. I saw her standing in the rear view mirror, phone in hand, still screaming. A day later, the experience still left a mark on me. I dreamed about it overnight. Her face was vivid in my mind. All day, I was filled with regret that I didn't let the police take care of it and hopefully get the woman taken away. Everything I didn't say to her floated in my head. I noticed it first when I took my dog out for a walk. A banged-up blue Chevrolet. Must have been from the 70s. The paint was peeling, replaced with rust. I didn't get a good look in from across the street. The glare from the sun was too strong, but it left an impression on me. I'd never seen a vehicle so distinct on the street before. Throughout the day, I kept looking out the window. The car was still there, down the road. I couldn't make out any features from the distance, but there was someone sitting in the driver's seat. It was freaking me out. I closed all the blinds in my apartment and tried to put it out of my mind for the time being. I was working the next day. It was at a cafe franchise in the same complex as the McDonald's. Most of my shift was spent making coffee and wiping down tables. The same old shit every day. Customers ranged from okay to horrible. I was just happy to get a paycheck. We closed later than most cafes at around 10 p.m., though we were usually out of there by 10:45 p.m. I noticed it when mopping the front of house. It wasn't so easy to see in the dark of night, but there was a blue Chevrolet, same model, same rusted coat in the parking lot just outside the store. Again, I couldn't see the person sitting in the driver's seat, so I wandered out back and checked the cameras. Also not good enough, even when zoomed in. My coworker kept asking if I was okay. Even though he tried to hide it, he was clearly annoyed that I was slowing down the close for no reason. I got on with mopping, but kept my eye on the parking lot. By the time we got out, the car was gone. It was back outside the apartment the next day. The car would arrive at around 10 a.m. and leave at 9 p.m. A few times throughout the day, it would leave and then come back an hour or so later. I could see the person sitting there for hours and hours, but I didn't want to confront them out of fear of what they might do. When I went in for my next shift, my coworkers were all staring at me. I greeted them with a good afternoon, but everyone returned it with a harsh glare. As I was stuffing my bag into a locker in the back office, the store phone began ringing. My other coworker in the back quickly shuffled out of there, ignoring the ringing. After a couple of seconds, it stopped. I closed the locker and put the key into my trouser pocket. The phone began ringing again. No one from front came out back. It was company policy that the phone must be picked up, but I wasn't to start my shift for another 5 minutes. I sat down at the office and listened to it ring until it eventually stopped. 10 seconds hadn't passed before the phone started to ring again. I picked it up. No caller was displayed on the screen. "You've reached." "Who is this?" A woman's voice commanded on the other end. "This is. Is this Amy?" I was shocked into silence for a moment. "How do you know me?" "What's your real name?" "What? You need to stop playing dress up. It doesn't suit you well. Who is this?" I looked at the monitor and saw the blue Chevrolet parked outside. "Is that you following me?" I asked. "Stop pretending to be a woman, then I'll leave you alone." She hung up. I watched the Chevrolet pull out of the space and exit the parking lot on the monitor. I didn't see her again all day. When I got home after closing, a notification appeared from Facebook Messenger. It was a random account, no photo, fake name requesting to DM me. I opened their request. "Hey, you don't know me, but I've been following this random page for a while. A handful of people are sharing your photos and private information around. Sorry you had to find out this way. They attached screenshots of posts from this group. All of them had my photos, ripped from my Facebook and Instagram accounts, posted along with disparaging comments and personal information. One of the posts even shared my address and workplace. Some screenshots of comments showed people taking glee in the idea of hurting me. All of them made fun of how I looked, picking apart all my insecurities one by one. He's too tall. Look at those big hands. Why is he caked in makeup in every photo? The anonymous account linked the group, but it was private. I called in sick the next day and took everything I had seen to the police. I told a detective about the Chevrolet, the online posts, the woman in the McDonald's. Everything. I printed off the screenshots. I gave them the link to the account. I noted the reg number of the car. All the detective did was assure me everything was going to be okay and made a report, although the lack of immediate action was concerning. I got home 2 hours later. The car was parked up on the same spot it had occupied for days. I called the police then, wanting to make sure a tangible incident report was made, hopefully creating a paper trail if it ever escalated. However, before the cops could arrive, the car was gone. They somehow knew the police were coming. I made my report to the officers and they scolded me for wasting their time before driving off. When I got into work the next day, my manager pulled me aside before I started my shift. He sat me down next to him in the office. "We've been getting reports," he said, "from employees here and head office of someone harassing everyone, and they keep naming you. I just want to make sure everything's okay and know if I can do anything to help." "What?" I was taken aback. "What about the head office?" "Well," he said, "HR have been getting floods of calls from no-calorie numbers and emails spammed to them. It's clear they're getting put into spam databases and stuff. We've had to turn the phone off here because people keep calling at all hours of the day. Head office have made reports to the police, but they're still investigating and want to make sure we give you the proper support." My heart sank. Everyone in the store had heard the women's rants, even the middle management that know of me through the paperwork they receive. All of them know the embarrassing comments some random woman made about me. All of them knew I was being stalked. The surveillance monitors were open on the desk. I looked up at them and saw the blue Chevrolet was in the parking lot. Something broke. I got up and walked out the door. My manager called after me, though I can't recall his words. There was a sizable chunk of concrete broken off the sidewalk just outside. I took it in my hand and made for the car. I got a close look at the driver, the same blonde, 40-something woman that had harassed me in the McDonald's. She saw me coming and immediately started the ignition and drove for the exit. "Leave me the fuck alone," I screamed. I arced my hand. The concrete left my palm and flew towards the Chevrolet. It missed the roof by a few inches and kept flying until it hit a black BMW parked behind it. The concrete broke in half as it left a massive crack on the windscreen. I fell to the floor. The emotions had finally hit me as the adrenaline wore off. I began crying and didn't stop for an hour. The police came. When the customer eventually came back to their car from the supermarket, he was pissed. Luckily, the 2 officers were able to keep things relatively calm. My manager spoke for me as I sat in the cafe. The 2 officers came in and informed me that he wasn't pressing charges so long as I covered the damages. Even though I had little money to my name, I agreed. My manager then told me to take a couple days off and said he was there if I needed help. All my coworkers stared at me in complete shock as I left the cafe. None of them said a word. I drove home by myself. Even though he needed it, I decided not to take my dog for a walk. I didn't want to be outside by myself at that moment. Instead, I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The blue Chevrolet is parked down the street. Story 5. We were driving cross-country when we entered a tunnel. Do not try to find it. My wife, Mia, and I were driving cross-country. It was our first attempt at the Great American Road Trip. Mia and I rented a small RV, more of a camper than a full-blown RV. We packed up a couple suitcases with plenty of room for any souvenirs, and we hit the dusty trail. We started our journey on the Mother Road, Route 66, driving south from Chicago until we connected to I-70 and shot straight west through Missouri. The goal was to see those parts of the country we had never seen before, stopping anywhere that seemed interesting. From the plains of Kansas up through the Badlands of Wyoming and South Dakota. In Missouri, we saw the world's largest cap gun. In Kansas, we visited the Evel Knievel Museum and the world's largest belt buckle. We love all those kitschy tourist trap places. Eventually, we made it to Colorado, and after a few hours more of driving through amber waves of grain, we saw them. The Rocky Mountains. We made an exit and headed north through the winding mountain highways. The Rockies were gorgeous. Snow-capped in the middle of summer, some of the peaks pierced through the white fluffy clouds. We saw a sign that read, "Traffic Tunnel 3 miles," a little further, and sure enough, there it was. A large tunnel bored directly through the mountain in front of us. A large sign read, "Pike Tunnel, longest traffic tunnel in the nation. Please turn your headlights on now." "How long is it?" asked Mia. "That's what she said," I quipped. But she was right. There was no information beyond the detail that this was the longest tunnel in the nation. "Can't be more than a mile or two," I said as I watched the little white car ahead of us slip into the darkness. A moment later, we joined it. The tunnel was lit by fluorescence that gave everything a greenish-yellow tinge. On the left-hand side was a raised walkway behind a railing for maintenance access. Initially, I was struck by the incredible amount of work that went into the construction of this man-made marvel. "We're under 1,000,000 tons of Rocky Mountain right now," I said. "How many years before this caves in?" Mia responded. I shot her a look. "Let's save the cave and talk until we're out on the other side. I'm just saying, nature will take this back eventually," she continued. I scanned the empty road ahead of us. Where did the other car go? I asked. We were now alone in the tunnel. No cars ahead of us, nor behind us. Huh. They must have sped off ahead. Maybe they're scared of a cave-in. My Spotify playlist had stopped playing. Mia looked at the phone. No cell service. She turned on the radio and spun the dial, only to find static. "You're not going to be able to pick up a station in here," I said. She turned the volume down. "Just wanted to check. If only we had some CDs. This tunnel really keeps going. I would have thought we'd be through it by now," I replied. I looked at the RV's odometer. 45,600 miles. I picked up speed. I wanted to try and catch up to the little white car. Up until this point, the tunnel was a straight shot, but now the tunnel started to curve to the right. It may have been my imagination, but it also felt as though we were descending. Mia felt it too, and she started to get antsy. Where did that other car go? How long is this tunnel? There was an urgency in her voice. I was getting nervous. Claustrophobia was not usually a problem for me, but when I looked down at the odometer and I saw that it had gone up by 3 miles, my mind began to wander to unsettling places. We were descending in altitude. I could feel it. I could see a slope in the lights on the ceiling and the railing of the maintenance walkway. I could feel a pressure in my head, and I was getting cold. "Could you grab me a Coke from the back, Mia?" I couldn't have Mia getting anxious. That would only start a chain reaction and make me freak out, which would then make her freak out. She unbuckled and ducked into the back of the RV to where we had a cooler stocked with drinks and food. Just as she stepped into the back, I saw something. There, standing on the side of the road, was a man wearing a reflective safety vest and a hard hat. He was waving to me as I passed him by. Something about him looked strange. I watched him in the side view mirror as we passed, and he was still watching the RV, still waving at the back of our vehicle as he faded into the distance. Mia reappeared from the back of the RV, Coke in hand. She popped it and handed it to me. "You look worried." "I'm fine." I smiled and took a sip of the Coke. "Eric, slow down." I slammed on the brakes as I saw what made Mia scream. In the road in front of us was a roadblock. Two reflective traffic sawhorses blocked both lanes of the tunnel. Beyond the roadblock, the lights of the tunnel were dark. There was nothing but a void of blackness. Standing in front of the roadblock was another man wearing a reflective vest and a hard hat. Only this time his hard hat had a light on top which obscured his face. We came to a jolting stop. I turned to Mia. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "It's a cave-in, isn't it?" "God, I hope not." I rolled down the window, leaned out, and yelled to the man in the hard hat. "Hey, what's going on?" The man was about 5 yards away. He took 2 steps towards us, and then raised a hand to his mouth and yelled, "Just doing some maintenance." "How long is it going to take?" I yelled back. The man made a hand gesture as if he didn't hear me. "How long is it going to take?" I called again. He made the same gesture. I unbuckled my seatbelt and grabbed the door release. "What are you doing?" Mia asked. "I gotta know what's going on, Eric. Just stay here. It might not be safe." "I'll be just a second," I said. I pushed the door open and stepped down from the RV. "Stay in your vehicle," the man yelled. He took a couple steps towards me with his hand out, telling me to stop. "What's the hold up?" I shouted. The man was a bit closer now, but I still couldn't see his face through the shining light on his helmet. "Please stay in your vehicle," he shouted. There was something off about him. Then I heard it, Yoah, a scream or something, rolled from deep in the tunnel. The worker turned and looked into the darkness. Then he ran past the barricades, and soon all we could see of him was the light on his helmet. The light disappeared a moment later. "What the hell was that? Is someone hurt?" Mia asked. "I have no idea," I said. "Should we do something?" Mia asked. I just sat there and watched the pitch-black tunnel in front of me. I had no idea what to tell her. I checked the side view mirrors. There was still nobody behind us. "Where are the other cars?" I asked. "They must have gotten through before the roadblock. Or maybe they caused the roadblock." Mia replied. "I saw another worker a little ways back. We could try to go back and talk to him. We'd be going straight into any oncoming cars. There's a maintenance walkway. We didn't pass him that long ago. We can probably catch him on foot. Maybe we should just wait for the guy to come back." She reached over and grabbed my arm. I squeezed her hand. She was right. I looked out at the tunnel ahead of us. I turned on the RV's high beams, but all I could see beyond the roadblock was more tunnel and more road. I checked my phone. Unsurprisingly, there was no service still. We waited, but the man never come back. "It's been 20 minutes, Mia said. "How come there hasn't been another car behind us?" I was having the same thought. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out. I looked back at the road behind us. It went back about 200 yards before curving out of sight. There was no sign of that first worker I saw on the maintenance walkway. I looked at the roadblock ahead of us and clicked on the RV's high beams. There was nothing beyond the roadblock but more tunnel. It didn't look like it was under construction, just very dark. "I think we should keep going," I said. "What about the roadblock?" "We'll move those sawhorses out of the way and just drive past," I said as I opened my door. Mia looked at me. Then she cast her eyes to the dark tunnel ahead of us. I knew she was processing the same limited options that I was. Driving backwards would be a huge risk in the instance of another car finally coming along. Getting out and walking would take God knows how long. We could have driven 10 miles at this point. Forward was our best option. "Let's do it," Mia said. We jumped out and quickly pulled the 2 sawhorses out of the right lane. I pulled the RV up past the barriers. Then we jumped out again and put the sawhorses back where they were. We didn't need another car to come barreling through. We were finally moving again slowly. It was pitch black save for the high beams of the RV. We crept forward at around 15 miles per hour. As the tunnel turned and twisted, my eyes started to play tricks on me. I kept seeing shapes at the furthest point of the tunnel. I kept seeing something standing just at the end of the next bend, but as we rolled forward, there was nothing there. "Where are the workers?" Mia asked. "I don't know." I was done rationalizing. This was all wrong. Traffic tunnels are never this long. My mind started to wander to all the road trip urban legends I'd read about. The killer in the backseat, the disappearing gas station, the pale man in the cornfield. Did we stumble into some strange outlier location? An in-between point on the endless roads that cross this country? Then I saw it. Look, a person. "Thank God," Mia shouted. As we rounded a curve in the tunnel, a group of maintenance workers entered our view. The 3 of them stood on the left side of the road behind 2 more sawhorses topped with flashing lights. 2 of them faced towards us. The 3rd was facing the other 2. The one with his back to us wore a light on his hard hat. Was this the same guy we saw earlier? How did he get this far away? I approached slowly and rolled down the window. "Hey, you left us waiting back there," I yelled. There was no response. In fact, all 3 men were completely silent, and it was hard to tell in the flashing light of the sawhorses, but they looked to be standing completely still. "Hello?" I yelled again. I pushed open my door and stepped out onto the pavement. "Eric, wait." I held up a finger to Mia. "Just a second." I slowly stepped towards the 3 men. "Hello?" No response. What the fuck? The bright lights of the sawhorses obscured their faces. I kept moving closer. "Hey, what's going on?" Then I saw it. Their faces. They were plastic. In front of me stood 3 mannequins. I backed away toward the RV. Then I turned and walked hurriedly to the vehicle. I was seriously freaked out, but I didn't want to alarm Mia. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. "They're mannequins," I said. "What? They're mannequins? Why?" "What?" "I don't know." I looked back over at the 3 figures and my blood ran cold. The hard hat mannequin had somehow turned around to face us. All 3 figures appeared to be watching us now. Then we heard a loud resonant banging on the side, and then the roof of the RV. "What the hell was that?" Mia whispered. We listened, holding our breath. Then a shuffling sound, something was moving on or in the RV. "Stay here," I said. I got up. "Eric, wait." I moved to the back of the RV. It was dark. I went for a drawer in the kitchenette space and pulled out a flashlight. I moved to the rear of the RV, the bedroom. My flashlight illuminated an empty room. "Whoever is back here, I have a gun." A shitty bluff. but I didn't see anything. I shone the light out of the windows of each side of the RV. Nothing. Then I heard a shuffling sound from right above me. I looked up and screamed, "Fuck!" On the roof of the RV, staring through the skylight, was a woman with vacuous black eyes and a dead smile. Her stringy black hair dangled down towards me, casting thin black shadows across her horrible pale face. "Mia, drive. Fast!" I screamed. Mia jumped over to the driver's seat, shifted into gear, and stomped on the gas. The RV was clunky, but it could move when it needed to. We lurched forward, and I fell back. I trained my flashlight up onto the skylight again, and the woman was gone. I scrambled to my feet and looked out of the side windows. Did Mia shake her off? There was no sign of the woman. I moved to the passenger seat, breathing heavily and sweating. "What happened?" she asked, keeping the RV at a steady 50 miles per hour. "There was a woman on the roof," I said flatly. I realized now that I was in a kind of shock. A woman? Her eyes were black. Mia just looked at me, then back at the tunnel ahead of us. "There's something wrong with this tunnel," I whispered. Mia pointed at the road ahead. "Look." I looked out at the tunnel. There were more mannequins. A lot more mannequins. They were positioned on both sides of the road. They were all facing us, and even though I never saw them move, when I looked in the side view mirror, they were somehow still facing us, turning to watch us as we drove past, watching without eyes. "Just keep driving," I said. As we drove on, the mannequins crowded the sides of the road more and more. There were thousands of them. Eventually, they were so close that some of their outstretched arms hit the side of the RV. They were closing in on us, squeezing our path forward. One stood in the middle of the road. "I don't think I can get around it. Run it over." "Don't stop." The RV smashed into the mannequin. Its head shot forward and bounced against the windshield, and the vehicle shuddered as it rolled over the body. Soon there were 2 in the road, then 3. I could see where this was going. Pretty soon there would be too many for the RV to ram through, but goddammit, we were going to get through as many as we could. "Speed up, Mia." Crash. The sound was surreal, smashing into mannequin after mannequin at nearly 60 miles per hour. Hands, legs, heads, and torsos flew. The windshield cracked, the RV shuddered and screamed, and eventually slowed down, despite the screaming engine. I'm certain the axle was jammed up with lifeless plastic body parts. Eventually, we came to a stop. "She won't move," Mia said. She pressed on the gas, but it was no use. The RV just rocked a little bit. "Try reverse." She shifted and pressed on the gas. We got some decent movement before running into another jam. "Fuck, should we get out and look?" Mia asked. "I'll go," I said as I grabbed the flashlight and popped the passenger door. Mia unbuckled her seatbelt. "We'll go together." We stumbled out of the RV on the passenger side. It was like stepping into hell. Countless, lifeless faces stared out at us from the darkness. The only light came from the headlights of the RV and my flashlight. We clumsily made our way along the side of the RV. The ground was littered with mannequin pieces. I thought to myself, if we could get a couple yards cleared out behind the rear tires, we might be able to back out and get enough momentum to reverse all the way back out of here. Instead, when we got to the back of the RV, my stomach flipped and my heart sank. I was expecting to see a trail of flattened mannequins. Instead, the RV was now surrounded by thousands of perfectly intact mannequins standing at attention, as if their ranks had somehow been replenished after our vehicular assault. "This is impossible," she started to cry. I held her close. "We'll keep moving," I said. "It will never end. The tunnel makes no sense. It only curves one direction." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" This whole time the tunnel has only been curving to the right. It would sometimes straighten out or go left for a few yards, but before too long we were curving to the right again. We've either been driving in circles or spiraling downwards, so we'll go back the way we came and hope we're not going in circles, I said. We had been driving for hours at this point. Walking back out the way we came would take days. But now that I thought about it, Mia was right. We'd only been curving to the right. This tunnel seemed to be very gradually taking us downwards into the earth. Going forward would not get us any closer to escape. We'll need food from the RV, Mia said. I nodded, and we stumbled our way back to the front of the RV, the mannequins' lifeless faces watching us the whole time. I stepped up to the passenger door and nearly fell back when I looked through the window. What the fuck? I breathed. What I saw were two mannequins sitting in the driver's and passenger's seat. How they got in there, I have no idea, but what really made my blood run cold was that they were dressed exactly like Mia and I. They wore identical sets of clothes. The one in the passenger seat had my same New Order t-shirt and black jeans. The one in the driver's seat had Mia's green striped sweater and denim shorts. Their plastic faces stared out through the shattered windshield at the endless crowd of mannequins staring back at them. Mia stepped up and saw the uncanny display. What the fuck? Mia echoed. I pulled myself up into the RV and slowly stepped around my mannequin doppelganger. I avoided looking into its face, but I swear I could feel it watching me as I stumbled around it. Mia followed, and we made our way into the back of our dark RV. Luckily, we had just stocked our cooler full of deli meat and water, not long after crossing the Colorado state line. I handed Mia the flashlight and pulled open the cooler. I filled a backpack full of food and water. I turned and saw them, my mannequin double, had somehow moved. It was standing in the aisle watching us. Mia's doppelganger was still seated in the driver's seat, but had turned to peer back at us with its eyeless gaze. Mia saw the look in my eyes and turned. She screamed when she saw them and backed into me. I put my arm around her, and we stood there a moment, letting our skyrocketing heart rates return to earth. Let's get out of here, I said. I slid the backpack onto my shoulders. Mia joined me at the door. I looked into her eyes. Are you ready? She nodded. I kissed her. I love you, I said. I love you, she said. The look on her face killed me. She was terrified. I'm sure the look on my face was similar. I opened the door and we stepped out. We again stumbled to the back of the RV. Once we were clear of the RV and all the crushed mannequin body parts, it became easier to find footing, though weaving through an endless crowd of lifeless people was a slow process. It was pitch black. Without the flashlight, we wouldn't be able to see a foot in front of us. As I walked, the beam of light created the illusion of movement in the crowd. At least I hoped it was an illusion. The limbs of the mannequins seemed to stretch and turn, but the only sound was that of Mia and I shuffling our way through the crowded tunnel. Things went on like this for what felt like hours. Mia and I were sweating and aching. I was about to suggest we stop and rest, but then I saw it, and I froze. Out in the crowd, beyond rows of blank faces, I saw a pale face, black hair, and a dead smile. I saw two vacuous eyes staring right at me. Mia, do you see her? I whispered. See who? I slowly raised my arm and pointed. It was the woman, or whatever it was, that stared back at me through the skylight on the roof of the RV. Oh my God! Mia squeaked. I could see now that the pale-faced woman was tall, a few inches taller than the mannequins. As I pointed, she stared back at me with a terrible grin. What do we do? Mia whispered. I raised the flashlight and pointed it right at the pale-faced woman. I thought maybe this would scare her off. I was wrong. The light only made her appear more unsettling as she stared back, unflinchingly. "What do you want?" I yelled. She only stared back at me. She was as still as the mannequins. "We have to keep going," I whispered. Mia didn't respond. Her body was tense as she held onto me. "We've come this far. We can't turn back again," I continued. I pulled Mia's hand, and we continued on our way through the mannequins, keeping the distance between us and her as wide as possible. As we moved past, she kept watching us. Though her movements were imperceptible to us, her eyes never left us. Like one of those portraits whose eyes appear to watch you no matter where you stand. Finally, we got far enough that she was out of sight. But the thought of her being somewhere behind us only unsettled me further, and I quickened our pace. As the hours wore on, there was no sign of the pale-faced woman, and the crowd of mannequins began to thin out. They still populated the tunnel from one end to the other, but there was more space between them, allowing Mia and I to walk more freely. The mannequins on the maintenance walkway on the side of the tunnel seemed to thin out as well, and I decided it would give us a better vantage if we were walking up there. I helped Mia climb up the railing that bordered the walkway, then I climbed up behind her. The walkway was elevated 3 or 4 feet above the roadway. We could easily see over the heads of the mannequins in both directions. There was, of course, no end to the tunnel in sight. We kept walking. The mannequins continued to thin out, but they were different now. There were mannequins dressed as maintenance workers again, but also mannequins dressed as families and businessmen. There was even a group of mannequin nuns standing in a single file line, heads bowed in prayer. Needless to say, we passed none of this on the way into the tunnel. I was feeling very hopeless that we were going to be able to find our way out. I was far beyond speculating how this was at all possible. It's not possible. And even if it were, there is no good reason for someone to do this to us. The only explanation was the supernatural. Then I saw her. Rather, I saw them. Arranged in the middle of the tunnel was a circle of mannequins with long black hair and tattered cloth. They looked exactly like the pale-faced woman, minus any facial features. I kept a close watch on them as we passed to make sure they didn't start following us. "A door!" Mia shouted. Mia pointed a few paces ahead of her. There was a door leading into the wall of the tunnel. We ran towards it. Mia grabbed the handle, turned it, and pulled. It was heavy and Mia had to brace her foot on the wall to get it moving. The metal door groaned as if it hadn't been opened in years. Finally, it was open enough to see past. It was a hallway. It went out about 5 yards, then turned right at a 90-degree angle. The strangest part was the design of the hallway. It wasn't cement or pavement like the tunnel. The walls were wood-paneled and the floor was covered in a thick carpet, like a house from the 1970s. "I say we see where this takes us," Mia said. There was no reason to disagree, but I wasn't going to get us trapped in there. I opened up my backpack and took out a water bottle. I opened it and handed it to Mia. She drank half, then I drank the other half. I slowly closed the door, shoving the empty water bottle in the crack to keep it from closing all the way. I turned to Mia. "Okay, let's go." We slowly made our way down the quiet hallway. We got down to where the hallway cornered to the right, and that's when we heard it ka-chunk. I whipped around. The door had closed behind us. I ran back to it and tried to push it open, but it was no use. There was no way it closed on its own. Someone had to have removed the water bottle. Our path had been chosen for us. There was no turning back. We continued down the hallway. We turned right. The hallway continued, then turned right again. That should have led us right back to the tunnel. But it didn't. This part of the hallway went on far longer than was possible without running into the tunnel. Then it turned right again. It went on like this. Sometimes a section of the hallway was 20 feet long. Sometimes it was 20 yards long. Sometimes it was 3 feet long. But it always turned to the right. At first, it was a relief to be somewhere other than the cold, dark tunnel. But the hallway very quickly became claustrophobic, and before too long, I heard someone walking behind us. We had stopped to take a break, and I heard a third pair of footsteps on the carpet, coming from behind us. I backtracked to the last corner. I was terrified as I slowly peeked around the corner, tense and waiting to see the vacuous eyes and inky black hair of the pale-faced woman. But there was nothing there. I wasn't about to backtrack any further. There was no one there, I whispered. Mia slumped against the wall and slid down to the carpet. I think I need to rest, she said. I put my backpack down on the ground for Mia to use as a pillow. She laid her head down and was passed out in seconds. I had no idea how long we had been walking at this point. I stood leaning against the wall. My body was telling me to rest, but I couldn't risk falling asleep. I had to keep watch. I knew she was following us. I took in the details of the hallway for the first time. The carpet was a dull brown and the walls a cheap wood paneling. The hanging lighting fixtures were shaded by stained glass, something you might see in an old diner. Who built this place? Did someone pick out the carpet and the lighting fixtures? Did a team of workers blast these tunnels into the earth? Or has this place always existed? Was this purgatory? I began to feel dizzy. I was panicking. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I slumped to the floor and tried to slow my breathing. I closed my eyes. I shot up in a panic. I had fallen asleep while I was meant to be keeping watch. I snapped to my feet and looked around. Mia was still asleep on my backpack. Then I noticed that the hallway had changed. A few paces away, there was now a plain wooden door in the wall. I slowly approached it. I put my ear to the door, and I could hear what sounded like TV static and the low murmur of voices. I discreetly grabbed the door handle and turned it slowly. I felt the latch bolt clear, and I carefully cracked the door just enough to peek inside. It was dark, so it took a second for me to register what I was seeing. I saw a small boardroom. A long table in the center was surrounded by seated men in suits. At the end of the table stood another man next to an old CRT TV that was playing static. This was the only source of light in the room, and all the men around the table were turned towards the TV. Suddenly, the screen flickered from static to a solid, dark background, and some warped New Age-style music began playing. Then the words appeared on the screen that terrified me like nothing else before. In plain text the words read, "You will lose her." I froze as I knew these words were meant for me. I watched with terror as the men seated around the table slowly turned toward me in unison. They were mannequins. The TV screen then clicked off, and they continued staring at me as I could barely make out their forms through the near-pitch darkness. I quickly pulled the door shut and whipped around to look at Mia. I had a horrible feeling of dread that when I turned around she would be gone, like the message on the TV promised Eric. "What are you doing?" Mia was leaning up and staring at me. Thank God. There was Mia right where I left her. I pointed at the door and said, "This door appeared, and what door?" She interrupted. I turned, and sure enough, the door was now gone. I explained what happened to her, but I left out the message that appeared on the screen. "You will lose her." Those words still burned in my brain. I tried to force them out. We drank water, ate granola, and then got moving again. Hallways. Endless hallways. After a couple hours of walking, we started to hear music. There were small speakers in the corners of the ceiling. I recognized it as the same new age music that played on the TV in the boardroom. The melody drilled into our minds. Combined with the dull aesthetics of the quiet hallways and the endless right turns, the music had a hypnotizing effect. The lengths of the halls became more uniform. That is to say, the straight section of hallway was about 7 paces, then a right turn, then 7 paces and a right turn. I think we're walking in circles. Or a square, Mia said. I looked at her and took out a bottle of water. I peeled off the plastic label and dropped it on the floor. Then we kept walking. 7 paces, right turn. 7 paces, right turn. 7 paces, right turn. And there it was. Mia was right. The label from my water bottle lay in the middle of the hallway. Somehow we had been led into a loop. I lost it. Phew-uck. I kicked the wall repeatedly and screamed. Mia just leaned her back against the wall. This was our dynamic. If one of us lost it, the other became zen and thought of a solution. More often than not, I was the one to lose it. I finally stopped freaking out. There has to be a way out. A door, Mia said. We would have seen it, I replied. A hidden door, she said. She turned around and ran her hands along the cracks of the wood paneling. Most likely on the outer wall, she said. She beat her fist on the wall, listening for a change in the sound. I exhaled heavily, sweating and tired, and I started searching the wall as well. We checked the whole first wall, nothing. We checked the second wall, nothing. The third, nothing. The final wall, nothing. I gave up and slumped on the floor. Mia immediately went over to the other side of the hall and started checking the inner wall. What are you doing? I thought you said it would be on the outer wall. I asked. Then we heard it. Mia beat the wall, and instead of the dead thud, we heard a resonate boom a door. I shot up and started tapping the wall with Mia until we found where the door ended. It was the width of about 4 wooden panels. I lined myself up in the center, lowered my shoulder, and pushed. It moved. It barely moved, but it was enough to confirm this actually was a door. I recentered and tried again, lowering my center of gravity. I pushed as hard as I could. The door pushed inward about 3 inches. Then Mia joined in. We slowly moved the door, 5 inches, then 10, then 15, then 20. Then Mia slipped inside. I had a moment of panic as she disappeared into the darkness, and those haunting words came back into my mind. You will lose her. I darted past the doorway, falling through the threshold and hitting the concrete floor. I looked up, and there was Mia, thank God. I promised myself I'd never let her out of my sight again. The exit, Mia said. She looked and sounded as if she were 1,000 miles away. I got to my feet and followed her gaze. What I saw nearly brought me to tears. We were back in the tunnel, but there was light. About a mile down was the mouth of the tunnel, and daylight pouring in. Beautiful daylight. I grabbed Mia tight and kissed her. Thank God, she cried. We started moving. Nothing was going to slow us down this time. We sped up into a run down the maintenance walkway towards the beautiful sunlight. As we approached, something else came into view. Parked in the middle of the roadway was a large vehicle. It couldn't be. It was. Our RV sat in the road waiting for us. We ran all the way to it, pulled open the passenger side door, and climbed in. There were no mannequins to be seen. I fell into the driver's seat, and Mia handed me the keys. I turned over the engine, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I shifted into gear and floored it towards the sunlight. As we got closer, I could see the green of trees and the blue of the sky. We were maybe 100 yards away. I turned to Mia, tears in my eyes. And what I saw turned my blood to ice. Just beyond Mia's window, That horrifying pale face grinned at me. The pale-faced woman was somehow floating outside of the RV. Before I could say anything, her hand smashed through the window and gripped Mia by the throat. Then, in one horrible motion, the thing pulled Mia screaming through the window and disappeared. I slammed on the brakes just as the RV passed through the exit of the tunnel and sunlight flooded the cab of the RV. I threw it in park and shot out of the door screaming, "Mia? Mia?" I screamed over and over. I rounded the front of the RV and looked back at the tunnel, and what I saw shattered my mind. The tunnel was gone. There was only open road. I had lost her.